Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
And if the yes vote is successful, we will be divided forever.
What does confrontational mean? It means you fight for what you believe.
We've got Trump-a-mania running this country, brother.
Unless you're scripted, you're useless.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Welcome to this Securing Our Energy Future Symposium. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. My name is Steven Tripp. I'm the president of Let's Rethink Renewables, and I'll be hosting this evening. Big thank you to the Condamine branch of the Liberal Party who have organised this event. Special thank you to Nerida who helped book the venue. And a big special thank you to Noreen, who's still on the front desk. No doubt you've all been getting phone calls from Noreen pestering you to come tonight, but she's been working very, very hard behind the scenes, so thank you very much to Noreen. The agenda tonight, we'll kick it off. We've got 4 great speakers. We're going to kick it off with Gerard Holland, then Paul Vallejo, Zoe Hilton, and then finally Matt Canavan. Now at the end we're going to have a Q&A. So what you need to do with the Q&A is that there's going to be a notepad at the desk down the back. If you want to ask a question, please head down to the desk at the back and write down your question, and then we'll read out those during the Q&A. And if we can pick up some time, hopefully we can have an intermission just before the Q&A, but we'll see how we go. So to kick things off, I'm going to introduce the president of Condamine Branch, who has led the way in organising this event. And he's been leading Condamine Branch for quite a while now. It's a good branch with some good people. So let's please welcome him to the stage, Walter Villatora.
Thank you, Steve. And we are really privileged to have Steve, the author, podcaster and MC for this evening. And I'd like to welcome everybody, and I look forward to taking on a subject which really is having probably the greatest impact on all of our lives. It is the most significant input in every process in terms of supply chains and a major contributor to cost of living. It's impacting on households, business, farmers, and our competitive positioning globally. So it is a minefield, and we are very fortunate to have such tremendous guests this evening to unravel a lot of the mysteries around all of the messaging that we're receiving, particularly this critical time in coming into a federal election. I will just touch on the political for a moment in terms of, and the Condamine branch is a branch of the Liberal Party. Our members are very focused on Warringah. However, I've been, I suppose, posted to the seat of Whitlam, which is a fascinating seat. It has been a Labor seat since Federation. It has had a prominent minister, Steve Jones, there for many years. And with the redistribution, it's effectively 2 seats. It's the Illawarra and the Southern Highlands. And the margin when we started the campaign was 10.6. It is now 0.6. And the Liberal Party's head on primaries. It's the first time in history that a Liberal leader has visited Whitlam. And we've had a launch recently of Angus Taylor, and we have Tony Abbott coming down shortly. So the reception's been extraordinary. There's a real chance to be able to win a seat that's been a Labor seat forever, and that could be a barometer of sorts in terms of where the election could end up. So it's not as simple as what the polling's reflecting. There are seats that are in play that have never been in play previously. So I'd love now to get back to why we're all here tonight. And again, thanks to our special guest, but particularly to Senator Canavan, who I think has the record for travelling the furthest distance to ever join one of our meetings, 1,435 kilometres. So welcome, Senator Canavan. I'll now hand back to Steve to introduce our guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. All right, so let's kick things off, shall we? We've got all great speakers tonight. I think you'll all be impressed by them all. Our first one is Gerard Holland. Now, he's the CEO of the Page Research Centre. It's a think tank that seeks to inform and influence policy that delivers positive outcomes for rural and regional communities in Australia. But before Page, the Page Research Centre, Gerard was the Director of Outreach and Strategic Partnerships for the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship in London, the ARC. And he also worked as an electorate officer for the Deputy Leader of the National Party, the Honourable Fiona Nash, and spent a season in Canada as a speechwriter. Please welcome Gerard Holland.
Thank you, Steve, Walter and the Canavan branch for having me. I'll start off just by apologising in advance. I'm battling a bit of a head cold, but I figure if Matt can fly down from Queensland in the middle of an election, that I can battle through a blocked nose. So, thank you, Steve. I am the CEO of the Page Research Centre. We are primarily focused on policy for rural and regional Australia. And the reason for that is with Australia's regionally integrated economy, if you dig it up, if you grow it, if you manufacture it, if you process it, if you transport it, if you come to visit it, chances are it comes from the regions. And better policy for rural and regional Australia will mean better policy for and better outcomes for all Australians. And the policy area that I'm particularly focused on, because it's one of the most distortive areas across our entire economy, across cost of living and our very way of life, and that is energy policy. Now, your power bills have gone up. I don't need to tell you that. They've gone up 60% in real terms in the last 10 years. That is drastically outpacing inflation. And it's not an accident. It's been because of deliberate policy decisions, and it's because we have forgotten two fundamental principles which should guide everything that we do with energy. And the first is the power of power density and dispatchability. And this says that the denser your energy source, the more control you have over when to harness it and utilise it for your system, the cheaper, more reliable and more resilient that system will be. But the second principle is that a system is not a market. And just because you can demonstrate something in a vacuum doesn't mean it's the most efficient use of your resources, and it doesn't mean that that's where the most value is created. So the first point on power density and why it matters. Power density is what has built the modern world and has powered just about every revolution and living standards that we've experienced since the Stone Age. It's power density that meant we moved from burning biofuels, timber, peat, animal fats for our heating and our energy needs to the industrial revolution of coal. It's power density when we worked out how to harness, transport, ship, utilise, universalise gas and oil. And it's power density which will power the next revolution in energy generation with the densest power source that we currently have that's commercially available, which is nuclear power. And the reason for this is very simple. In order to have a cheap system and a reliable system, ideally you have a small amount of machines doing a lot of work all the time. It is always going to be more efficient than a diffuse system of lots and lots and lots of little machines scattered all over the place that constantly turn on and off and are only doing little bits of work, little parts of the time. So just to give an example of what that looks like in practice. So if I wanted to power 100,000 homes for 1 hour, this is power density. It would take about 54 tonnes of coal, and of course your coal-fired power plant. It's about 2 school buses worth of coal. It would take your nuclear reactor and about 3 kilograms of enriched uranium. It's about a tennis ball of uranium. To power 100,000 homes for 1 hour, you need 50,000 tonnes of solar panels, about 3,000 AFL fields to power for 1 hour. But of course, that's assuming that the sun is shining. If I want to produce this hour of electricity in the evening when the sun isn't shining, well then I need 2 school buses worth of coal. I need my little tennis ball of uranium. But when I don't have my solar panels working, I need batteries. Now, for 1 hour of electricity for this 100,000 homes, you need about 50 Tesla batteries. This is about 2 basketball courts worth of batteries. But of course I have to charge these batteries, so that means I need additional solar in the grid so that we have an excess to charge them. So we add another 600 AFL fields of solar panels. This is for 1 hour. And then those batteries are fully discharged. If you want 2 hours, another 600 AFL fields of solar panels, another 2 basketball courts of Tesla batteries, and so on and so on and so on. This illustrates the point for 100,000 homes. We live in a nation of 27 million people, plus an industrial sector, plus businesses, plus hospitals, plus everyone else that uses electricity. This is a really big problem that we haven't yet been able to solve. Now, what does this look like over a generation? Because that's a lot of solar panels, it's a lot of transmission lines that need to get built in order to scale for Australia's energy needs. This is a slide from a talk that I gave last year at ARC. And I spent 15 minutes pretty much just going into this slide in more detail, so I won't go into too much detail here, but the top line is, over the next 60 years, which is about the shortest length that you'll get out of a nuclear power plant, about what you could extend coal to, but we've been generous and said that you need to take it down and rebuild it after 40 years. Solar panels, wind turbines, you get 15, 20 years out of them, they have to replace multiple times. So over 20 years, this is what it will cost in order to make this system work for all of Australia's energy needs, and this includes the fuel for the nuclear and coal, it includes takedown costs, it includes more manufacturing. So this here on the left, the farthest, closest to me, hang on, I've got a little buzzer, don't I? 50-50 renewables, this is the teal dream. So this is no gas in the system, this is no coal, this is just batteries, renewables, and some pumped hydro. You're looking at about 2.6 trillion, and that's probably a low ball figure. Over the next 60 years. For our current pathway, this is what we're legislated towards now. This is 50-50 renewables. I say 50-50 because that's a mixture of solar panel and onshore and offshore wind. You come out to about the same figure no matter which way you cut it. But then keeping gas in the system as firming as well as batteries, everything else. This is what we're currently on track for, about $1.2 trillion. This is what a system would look like if we predominantly went with nuclear. Nuclear has a lot of upfront costs, but once you get it going, they're very cheap to run over the long term. And long term, you're looking about 850 billion. So about, what's that, a third of our current pathway. And then this is what it would look like if we had a system just based on coal, a little bit of gas for firming. We would need to scrap net zero and do a couple of things to get there. But this is rebuilding the entire grid, not factoring in existing coal in the grid, looking about 500 billion, including all the maintenance over the next 60 years. So that gives you a bit of an overview of just how different these pathways get once you factor in the full system cost of what we're trying to do. And that brings me to my next point, which is a system is not a market. So there's 3 things that influence the price of a good, and it's the same if you're making coffees or it's the same if you're generating electricity. The first is you have to work out how you're going to pay off your capital expenditure. So if I have a good and it costs me, let's pull a figure out of the air, $100 million to build, well then how do I price what I'm getting out of that to make sure that I make back my initial investment? And so here's where you got your first problem with renewables, is if you've got coal and nuclear, they're running all the time, 24/7, over a 60-year period, you can price that in to say, I'm going to pay off my asset over the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years. If you've got electricity that only generates a few hours of the day, well, then you have to make your cost back in those short windows. And you've only got 15 or 20 years in which to do it. So that's the first problem. Second problem, you've got supply. So, okay, I've got my good, I've brought it to market, but who else is in the market? How much supply is there? Because if other people are producing what I'm producing, but they're doing it cheaper, that means I can't sell my good for more expensive than they're doing it. Now, each additional renewable that we build, it doesn't flatten out supply over the day, they're all competing at the exact same time. So each additional solar panel that we build makes the profit margins of my previous solar panel worse. So actually, the more that we build into the system, the worse it gets for the investors. So how do we cover that shortfall? Well, there's a hidden tax on all of your energy bills called small and large generator certificates, and basically we're subsidising them. Because when they're actually producing electricity, the cost of electricity is very, very low. Because they only produce for a short amount of the day, the taxpayer, or the government on debt, is basically paying the difference to make sure it keeps these companies in business. And then the third thing is then you talk about demand. When is the demand, and does that supply that we have meet the demand? Now, it's all good if in the middle of the day you've got plenty of electricity in the grid, but what happens when the sun goes down and everyone still needs electricity? Well then, because there is high demand but low supply, it means the value of that goes up. And this is why you see this really volatile market where you see the price crash in the middle of the day and then spike at these peak times around when you generate electricity. Now, again, this is a really big problem because if you have baseload power like coal or nuclear and they're trying to compete, well, they can't make money in the middle of the day. They're being punished for being reliable electricity. You can't just turn a nuclear power plant on and off. You can't just turn a coal-fired power station on and off. So we rely on gas for this. But again, there's an enormous amount of demand in these short peak windows. This is why you have these massive spikes in prices. So this is another reason why these renewables, the system does not reflect the realities of a vibrant market. Now, batteries aren't the fix here. Exact same problem. You've got these really expensive assets that you're only switching on for an hour or two of the day. How do you price your electricity in a way that both pays off the asset and responds to the demand? And so either A, you overbuild the batteries and the taxpayer subsidises it again, or B, you try and put it at a competitive price point, which means that us as the consumers are paying exceptionally expensive energy during those times when the batteries are coming on. You don't get around that problem. The problem is volatility in the market, not the firming technology. And I mentioned this earlier, so the baseload can't compete. It's punishing reliable electricity and making reliable electricity more expensive. So what are the consequences of all of this? Well, as I mentioned, it's getting more expensive. High power bills mean greater pressures on cost of living. Electricity impacts every single input on the value chain, from whether you grow it and dig it up, transport it, refrigerate it, manufacture it, sell it, consume it at home. Electricity is through all of that, and that's why it's one of the most fundamental drivers of our current cost of living crisis. Low-income households are hit the hardest. They pay the highest percentage of their energy bills. Highest percentage of their household income goes towards energy bills. It's no coincidence that the wealthier suburbs and the wealthier seats have the biggest fantasies about renewables, because they're insulated from the immediate price shocks of expensive electricity. But businesses are aware. There's a reason why we've had a record number of business insolvencies over the last couple of years. It's a reason why productivity has stagnated. We did some modelling on this at the Page Research Centre, and based on a 60% price shock over the last 10 years, which is what we've experienced, that equates to about 3% of lost GDP over the last 10 years, which is about 81 billion this year alone. This is a graph from that paper that we did. I would encourage you to check it out on the page.org.au website. And this is different household incomes and percentage. So you're looking at 15% of the lowest incomes are paying on energy bills, and then as you get up to wealthier households, it's a small percentage of their bills. And our current trajectory isn't going to change. There's a lot going on in this table, but I'll try and summarise it really quickly. This up here is our current pathway. Power bills are going to go up another 30 to 70% over the next 5 to 10 years, and we still need an additional 260 billion of expenditure. This is the coalition's plan here, tech neutral, bringing in nuclear. Could possibly see some suppression on prices, or a modest increase in about 160 billion. And then this is, if we scrap net zero, ultra supercritical coal, you could look at a retail price impact of 25% off, quarter off your bills, to a modest increase depending on global prices, and another 100 billion in expenditure. The second trade-off, the second consequence, is we are destroying our environment to try and change the climate. So I mentioned before these 3,000 AFL fields just to power 100,000 homes. Well, the Net Zero Steering Group, this is an independent group, received some money from the government, partnered with Melbourne University, tried to map out how does Australia actually decarbonise its energy grid by 2060. And this is what it looks like. These here, these Tasmanias, are solar farms, or industrial solar plants. These pink, this is the transmission that will be required. This is what our countryside will look like in order to actually decarbonise our grid with the strategy that the government has adopted. And then this is what it looks like in practice. This is Daydream in Queensland. I'm sure Matt knows all about this. This is a mountain range. This is the scale of the solar that is coming, and more of it is slated to be built. And then the last consequence, and this is a whole half an hour talk in and of itself, but we are becoming logistically and strategically dependent on China. The Albanese is made in Australia, is made in China. We might manufacture the end product here, but all of the rare earths, all of the critical mineral refinery, it still comes from China. They have a complete 90% logistical monopoly on that. We mine rare earths, we ship them to China to refine them. No other country refines them. That's a whole other kettle of fish. But this means that we are building an energy grid rather than what we have in the ground, that we control, that we have sovereign control over. We're dependent upon Chinese manufacturing. And there's a lot going on here, but this is all of the components. So here, the blue is China. So electrolyzers, heat pumps, solar PV, wind, batteries, all China. Steel, cement, aluminium, the bulk production is still China. Critical minerals, copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, China has control over that. Australia's here, we dig the lithium up. So we mine them, we don't produce them, we don't bulk produce them. This is a very, very serious issue as we head into some of the greatest geopolitical turbulence that we've experienced since the Cold War. So what do we do? I actually am quite optimistic. I think we're given these challenges because we're meant to respond to them. And we all have air in our lungs, we have fight in our bodies, and you've all come here because you're interested. So I think we can do things. The first is we need to start investing in cheap, dense and reliable energy. And that means coal right now, and it means building nuclear for our kids and future generations. We need to reform the energy market. As I mentioned before, we are currently punishing reliable energy producers because we have a system that doesn't recognise producing electricity over time. It only recognises producing electricity at a fixed point. So if you made renewables responsible for their own firming, you would very quickly find out what the real cost of some of these projects were. And the third one is what the Coalition has already hinted at, which is unlock gas, both frack for more, especially in Victoria. We have international trading partners that are desperate, especially as we head into this geopolitical turbulence, as I mentioned. But also, I think the domestic gas reserve is a good idea. WA's been doing it for 30, 40 years. They generally have cheaper gas prices than us. We didn't need one up until the mid-2010s because we didn't export a lot of gas. We export gas now. We're subject to the global market. I'm very happy with the gas reserve to make sure that we're getting cheaper prices as long as we're still maintaining all of our contracts to our neighbouring partners. So with that, I'll commit it to our next speaker. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gerard. That was fantastic. That was a great speech and a lot of great information. That's the problem with this issue. The information is so dense that it's hard for a lot of people to keep up with it all, but that's what we're trying to do here tonight. Now, our next speaker is a member of the Condamine branch. He actually was a former aeronautical engineer for NASA, believe it or not. He spent about 10 years at NASA, and before you ask, he does believe that we went to the moon, so please don't bombard us with those questions. But he's a wealth of knowledge. I've had him on my podcast a lot. He talks about a lot of issues, and speaking about nuclear energy is one of his passions, and it is one of probably the better issues that he speaks about. So please welcome Paul Vallejo.
All right, nuclear power, safe, reliable, banned. Before we talk about nuclear power, we have to understand how energy policy is a narrative. It's not about science, it's about a story. And in that story, scientists who go off script lose their funding. You have skeptical news media is banned, and inconvenient data is ignored. Narrative science only cites studies that support a particular conclusion, and they often launch ad hominem attacks on people that end up disagreeing. And they also confuse scientific consensus with data. That's not how real science works. Real science, from the scientific method, it invites falsification, and it collects and argues the data and not the credential. Narrative news then comes in behind narrative policy, and it echoes the talking points of the powerful interests, and only finds experts that agree with their pre-existing conclusions. Also frames disagreement in propagandistic terms, like calling people deniers. There's a green energy narrative, where our green energy is completely environmentally safe. But then there's a green energy counter-narrative, which then accounts for the true costs of the environmental destruction. There's a nuclear narrative and a nuclear counter-narrative. But before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I got my engineering degree at University of Virginia. They had an aerospace program, a nuclear reactor on the top of the hill. My degree had a concentration in aerospace engineering and nuclear engineering. I went to NASA, worked there for 10 years. One of the things that we studied was the safety and reliability of a nuclear rocket. It wasn't approved, but it was a very interesting study. I also have 2 other science degrees in economics and behavioral sciences. So as was pointed out before, there's a the difference between nuclear energy and chemical energy is fundamentally different. All the energy you see around you is based on the changing of electrons in molecules. And our chemical energy none of it touches the nucleus of the atom. On the other hand, nuclear energy comes from the fusion of nuclei, which powers the sun, or fission, the splitting of atoms that powers our nuclear reactors. And there is a vast difference, as pointed out before, in the energy density. Energy density is a key. In chemical energy, you can get between 10 and 100 hundreds of megajoules per kilogram. Nuclear energy gets into the millions or tens of millions. So energy density is vastly, not even close. It's not even 10 times. It's far, far more in terms of nuclear density, energy density. And the thing you want about your power is a few things. One is you want reliable energy. That's actually real in our modern economy, that's completely key. And you also want safe energy. In terms of reliable energy, Australia is the nuclear superpower of the world, with the world's highest uranium reserves and the third largest thorium reserves. Meanwhile, as was pointed out before, overseas dependence is what comes with our so-called renewable, practically unreliable energy, where windmill magnets come from China. The cobalt supply comes from the Congo, mostly, usually mined in very poor conditions. And so the next thing you want is consistent power, as was pointed out before. Wind and solar is a roll of the dice. Demand has to be met all day, at every point in the day to avoid blackouts. Nuclear power provides baseload power, whereas wind and solar cannot. And when wind and solar have a bad day, who's going to party like it's 1699? Candlelight dinners sound romantic, but what about hospitals, freezers, traffic lights? This is a big problem. Our modern society absolutely depends on reliable electricity. Your life depends on it. People can adjust to slow change. 15,000 years ago, you could walk to Tasmania or Papua New Guinea. As the sea levels rose 100 meters, okay, people had to relocate, but the humanity, the vast majority of people survived. Okay, for 15,000 years ago, the sea level rose 100 meters since then, and we've had relative stability in our sea levels since. Now, also, we managed to survive the last 100 years, where Fort Denison's tide gauge chart, we've had a 0.1 meter sea level rise. People can live with that. What you can't live with, and here's your homework assignment for our horror movie, ask your favorite AI, what happens to Australia if a Carrington event happened today? You'll have to tell it not to sugarcoat it, because it won't tell you how many millions of people will die until you tell it not to sugarcoat the answer, okay? So what is a Carrington event? A Carrington event was a large coronal mass ejection in 1859. The good news is, people in Colorado could read their newspapers in the middle of the night from the aurora that was so bright. Thing was, there was no electricity grid back then, okay? If that happened today, it would be lights out in the cities for months. Okay. In 2012, a CME hit where the Earth was 9 days before. If it had been 9 days earlier, it would have been lights out and an absolute catastrophe. And we could do something about this. With a tenth of the cost of what we've used our so-called renewable subsidies for, we could harden our grid and buy spare transformers so that this sort of Damocles does not hang over our heads. But we're acting like children, and that is not how we're spending our money. Back to nuclear energy. Another thing you want to know, other than reliability, which is the most important thing, is your power production safe? But don't judge nuclear by old designs. Back when Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island happened, they were designed in the 60s, built in the 70s. That's what our telephones looked like. That's what our computers looked like. Okay, and what was wind and solar power generation back then? There wasn't any. So we have to compare modern designs to modern designs. You also cannot avoid radiation. Natural radiation is all around us. It comes from the cosmic rays from space. It comes from our soil. Even your key nutrients are radioactive. Everyone needs potassium, and 120 parts per million of potassium is radioactive, potassium-40. It is a part of our natural environment. It's actually essential. Nuclear is already the most safe form of energy production that we have. So let's talk a little bit about how this works. There are 4 types of radiation. Alpha radiation, which is basically a helium nucleus. Beta radiation is a high energy electron. High energy photons come out called gamma rays, which is just a very short wavelength light. No, it does not turn you into the Hulk. If you can avoid it, high gamma radiation source, please do. The only kind of radiation that can produce radioactivity is neutron radiation. And that's what actually that's what continues the chain reaction in our nuclear reactors, where one neutron splits the nucleus of a uranium-235 atom, releasing more neutrons, and if another uranium-235 atom is in close proximity, it can then split and continue the chain. Radiation that is on the exterior of you is quite easy to shield. Alpha rays, alpha particles can be shielded by a sheet of paper. Beta particles by a thin sheet of aluminum. Lead and water will shield the neutrons and the gamma rays. The thing that you need to avoid is an uncontrolled nuclear fire. The good news is you can do that. You can do that with modern designs using passive safety. Why is passive safety so important? Active safety requires human intervention to do something about. Okay? People need to do something to avoid a catastrophe, but modern designs can use passive safety, where you don't need to do a thing. Well, how does that work? Well, let me give you an example. When you look at this dam, if there's a large influx of water, does the safety system require anyone to do anything? No. The water will then automatically rise and go over the spillway, and no one has to do anything. In a nuclear reactor, an example of that is having a freeze plug, where if the cooling systems and the circulatory systems go offline, the freeze plug melts and the nuclear material goes into a dump tank where it loses criticality and cools. That's an example of having a passive safety system that makes sure there is no uncontrolled reaction. The AP1000 plant, as proposed by Peter Dutton, has 72 hours of passive safety, where no one needs to interfere. And by that point, the power level has gone down 99%. I would like to have, personally, all nuclear systems be 100% passive, that they permanently have passive safety. But it's still a very good start. It's considered a Generation 3 plus nuclear design. Generation 4 can have 100% passive safety, and it can also burn our high-level waste. Next, I want to talk about environmental safety. And here we're going to have a short segue about what a boy from the Bronx is doing 12,000 miles from where he was born to talk to you about energy. Okay. So I've been to 50 countries. Out of all the places I've been, Australia was the first place I ever came to that felt like home. I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the place. This is my happy place. This is Lake Narrabeen. You'll find me paddling into the sunset any day that I can possibly get away. I love nature. I'm not a pub person. I'm not a city person. Okay? And that's why I can't stand what's going on, what's being done to our Australian countryside. It's absolutely unconscionable. As talked about before, energy density means you have low volumes of waste. A pinky's worth of nuclear material will power your life for a decade. Meanwhile, they say wind and solar are green and renewable. This isn't green. And this is on the production side for lithium mines, on the production side for cobalt mines. We're being sold a story. And shockingly, people are buying it because I'll call it corrupt media will not tell the main part of the story. Sorry, this is the cobalt mine. And also on the production of silica for our solar panels, silicosis, just because people aren't getting cancer mining it here doesn't mean that it's environmentally friendly. And that's just on the production side. On the disposal side, being called green and renewable is also a fantasy. The windmill blades go into the ground. Solar panels are very hard to recycle. And what will we do with the megatons of toxic trash? The only thing that does recycle well is stories. Stories like when the president of the Maldives signed a document underwater to try to combat climate change, right? And he was trying to point out that he needed to grift subsidies from the United Nations in order because his country was going underwater. 14 years later, they're building 5 new airports, not underwater airports, okay? Nuclear plants in France, that's an article that talks about the land uses was talked about earlier already. This is our net zero plan. Australia already exports 200 metric tons of thermal coal every year, enough to produce 500 terawatt hours of power. It produces that power reliably. It produces that power wherever it goes, and it produces it cheaply at 9 cents a kilowatt hour. But our plan is to import 250 terawatt hours of unreliable, farm-destroying, bankrupting, koala-killing power that is going to be far more expensive than the power we export. Okay, and not only that, the coal that we're shipping overseas gets burnt into the same atmosphere. We're not saving anyone. We are acting like children, subsidizing our own demise. Where our climate subsidy, our subsidies for this foolish plan is already at about $140 billion. Meanwhile, since that time, since we've been subsidizing it, as pointed out before, the electricity prices have gone through the roof, increasing even faster than the consumer price index. Meanwhile, our economic competitors laugh at us as they produce dependence for us and they get our cheap energy while, while our politicians and our media sell us stories about how we're saving things. There are only two conceivable ways to get to net zero, truly, if you want to, and I'm not saying you need to, but if you wanted to. One is you use nuclear power, dense, reliable, safe nuclear power with passive safety systems. The other way to get to net zero is you take the half of the coal that we send overseas and you bring it right back into port and unload it and burn it here. That's the other way you get to net zero. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was amazing. And if you have any questions for any of our speakers, just a reminder to head to the table at the back. There's a notepad, and you can write down your questions there. And when we get to the Q&A, we'll ask those questions to our wonderful speakers. But if I can just quickly have a little presentation of myself, just to let you know about Let's Rethink Renewables and what we're trying to achieve for this upcoming election. Now, this is some of our artwork here. All of this artwork has already been paid for, and it's been rolled out in some areas in Queensland, like Gympie already. Now, we are offering this artwork free of charge for anyone that it's free to use. All we need for people is to fund for this artwork to go up on billboards, or you can print it out as flyers, or whatever you need to do, just contact us. You can head to letsrethinkrenewables.org and contact us there, or speak to us afterwards, because this is a massive issue, this rollout of renewables. Now, in New South Wales, we have 5 renewable energy zones. Now, on the Energy Co website, they describe these as the equivalent of modern-day power stations. So as you can see here, there's one in New England, one in the Hunter Central Coast, one in the Illawarra, one in the southwest, and also this one here in the central west Arana, which is on this second image here. That is 20,000 square kilometres. This is the size of this rollout of renewables that is happening across our country. It's not only happening on land, it's also happening offshore. So this is the Illawarra project. This is the one where Albo was heckled recently. That's just off the coast of Shell Harbour and Wollongong and areas like that. That's going to be over 1,000 square kilometres. Now, if you think that one's bad, this one here in the Gippsland in Victoria, that has a declared maximum size of 15,000 square kilometres of offshore wind floating in our waterways. We have whale migration zones going through there, a whole box of dice. This is a big environmental issue that no one is talking about. Now, this is a document that was put out by the Victorian government. This is their offshore wind policy directions paper. Now, on this paper, it admits that there is a significant challenges for onshore wind and solar to meet our net zero energy needs. Analysis indicates that to meet net zero targets using onshore renewables could require up to 70% of Victoria's agricultural land to host wind and solar farms. They're going to need 70% of agricultural land in Victoria to get to net zero with wind and solar. That's what this policy document is admitting. And it's making that argument to argue for offshore wind. So that's what this policy document was all about. And as you can see on this map here, that's all the agricultural land in Victoria, and that's the size of it. So take that 127,000 and divide that by 70. We'll get the 70% of that, and that's what they're looking at with all this renewables rollout. Now, here you would be familiar with the teals here in Mackellar and Warringah. Now, this is Sophie Scamps dancing along the beachfront. And what she says on here is, if only we lived in a country with ample sunshine and wind to become a renewable energy superpower. But I have one question about this video. Where are the offshore wind turbines? Where are the solar panels? You never see that stuff in these areas. And this one's classic. She's since deleted this, by the way, but this was up until only recently. This is Zali Segal's website. She says here, right in black and white under her policy page, I do not support wind farms along Warringah's beachfront. She goes on to say that it is unfortunate, you can almost imagine her saying this, it's unfortunate that such an important issue as the climate crisis is trivialised by some and reduced to my personal use of solar panels, the car that I drive, and a joke petition to put windmills on Manly Beach. It might be a joke for Zali, but it's not a joke for people living in Dunedoo and Yass and Dubbo and areas like that are facing wind and solar panel projects on their doorstep. If anyone's seen the one out at Wellington, it's unbelievable the size and scope of these projects. So what we're proposing with this unrenewable campaign that we have at Let's Rethink Renewables is to get this artwork out, and if we can get one of these billboards up in Warringah or Mackellar or somewhere like that, I think that would make a difference in highlighting to everyone the environmental destruction that is happening in our rural communities. And if someone wants to donate for this big kahuna, we can put it on the side of a truck. So I just want to raise that for everyone so that you're made aware of what we're trying to do by highlighting this issue. So we'll move on, because that's a bit of a downer, but now for someone who might bring a bit of light to all of this, Zoe Hilton. She's the Senior Policy Analyst working for the Energy Program of the Centre for Independent Studies. She co-authored the Energy Team's flagship paper, The 6 Fundamental Flaws Underpinning the Energy Transition. She's written for The Australian, the Australian Financial Review and the Australian Spectator, and she's got some really great YouTube videos up on the CIS YouTube page, which you may have already seen. Please welcome Zoe Hilton.
Well, it's good to be back in Balgowlah. I used to live on Seaview Street, so it kind of feels like coming home. But yes, I hope you're ready to dive into some modelling, because I'm going to talk about renewables, coal and nuclear, and what each option will cost and what that means for our energy future. So, the main 3 reports that we need to dive into to understand what has been done on the economic modelling for each of these options are GenCost, the Integrated System Plan, and the Frontier Economics Report. So, GenCost is an annual report that the CSIRO does where they basically look at all of the different energy source options and compare the costs. So it's a levelised cost of electricity. It's not a full system model, but that is done by the Integrated System Plan, and that's what the energy market operator does every 2 years. It's a full system analysis. It looks at transmission and storage. And so both of these documents proclaim that renewables are lowest cost. But then you have the Frontier Economics Report. This is also a full system analysis that attempts to reflect what the Integrated System Plan is doing, but it also looks at nuclear, and it says that nuclear lowers system costs. So that's the way to go, not renewables. So let's dive in and see what is going on under the cover of each of these reports. So firstly, GenCost. Now, the CSIRO claim that nuclear is more expensive than renewables and than coal as well, but when you look at the actual values that they have in their report, while nuclear looks really, really expensive compared to renewables, coal is actually cheaper on the lower end. It just looks a bit more expensive because of the upper end here. So even in their graph, without changing anything, coal actually is a little bit cheaper than renewables, so the headline is a little bit misleading. But then we get into the assumptions. So GenCost's nuclear assumptions are seriously flawed. They assume an economic life of 30 years, but we have plants that are going to last much beyond 60 years. So Besnau in Switzerland is going to last for 64 years, and they could potentially last even 80, 100. And so that's something that makes nuclear look a lot worse in the modelling cost-wise because they're assuming a much shorter life. Then we have the nuclear capacity factors that are assumed, which are 53 to 89%. So a capacity factor of 53% basically means that you build a nuclear plant and then you switch it off half the time to make room for wind and solar. So you might be wondering, why would you build something that gives you reliable, clean electricity and then switch it off to make room for intermittent electricity? And that is a great question. And when we look at the US, they achieve 93% capacity factors. So they are running their nuclear plants pretty much all the time at full pelt. And these are reactors that have been built in the 60s and 70s. So we should definitely be aiming to achieve somewhere in 89%, 90% and above if we were to build nuclear plants. Now, the coal assumptions in GenCost are also seriously flawed. They do not look at brownfield sites. They only consider greenfield sites. And what this means is you have Loy Yang B over here. That plant was built with a big empty space next to it for a new coal unit to be put in later. At the time, they envisioned that they would be putting in extra units at the site. And the good thing about putting in extra units is that it means that you don't have to spend as much on all of the infrastructure, it's already there. So you save on costs by putting new units on brownfield sites. You can also save on costs by refurbishing old plants to give the coal units a bit of extra time. So these options are not considered, they only look at completely new sites without any existing infrastructure. Then the other issue is that they assume that we would have to build an advanced ultra supercritical plant. So we don't have any of these in Australia, and the design that they chose for their model is a design that hasn't been built anywhere in the world. It has unprecedented steam temperatures and pressures. And so while we have plenty of subcritical plants, and we do have a supercritical plant, Kogan Creek, they don't even consider those as an option. It's just, oh, it must be this more expensive design that has never been built anywhere. So that also contributes to pushing up the price of coal in the model. And another thing that contributes to pushing up the price of coal in the model is their methodology on coal fuel costs. So essentially what CSIRO do is they have a low and a high assumption for each year going forward in their model. And those numbers are taken from the IASR, which is the Inputs, Assumptions and Scenarios report, which AEMO does for the ISP. It's an input, and essentially AEMO has a forecast for each individual coal plant in the network, a low assumption and a high assumption. And instead of the CSIRO taking the average of the lows and the average of the highs, or taking the maximum of the highs and the minimum of the lows, which would be a consistent way of doing things, they have taken the average of the lows and the maximum of the highs. So what that does is it pushes up the upper bound and makes the lower bound look a lot higher than it would have been if you'd chosen the minimum, and it just shifts that entire range upward of what it would have been if they had been consistent in their methodology. Now, coming to the renewables assumptions. So this graph shows the different cost categories that they have included in their supposedly firmed renewables estimate, because they have been criticised for not including transmission and storage. So they've attempted to sort of halfway do a full system analysis, but haven't properly done it because they don't want to contradict AEMO. And so, because AEMO has done the ISP, that's the full system analysis. So if we look at the 90% wind and solar, 90% VRE column over there, you can see the storage estimate is at the top, purple. That is $18 per megawatt hour. But when we look at the ISP, which actually does try to do a full system analysis, it really should be more like $60 per megawatt hour when you're getting to 90% renewables. And that's 230% more. So what's with the discrepancy? Why is GenCost massively underestimating storage? And the answer is we don't know, because they won't give us their data. They have not released all of the data necessary to actually check they're working, because again, they don't want to contradict AEMO. Then we come to synchronous condensers. So these are big machines that are required for system stability. They provide grid inertia. They're essentially a big flywheel that spins and stops the grid from going down when you have increasing penetrations of wind and solar in the network. And currently, coal, gas, hydro, they all provide that inertia. Nuclear would also provide that inertia just as a byproduct of the way that they run, because they have big turbines. But when you have lots of wind and solar, now you have to pay for synchronous condensers. But you'll notice, I don't know if you can even see, there's this teeny tiny little stripe on the graph there. That's the synchronous condenser cost. So it's basically zero according to the CSIRO. And how can these massive machines be next to nothing in cost? Well, the CSIRO says we'll have enough gas in the system that it can provide the inertia. But hang on, if it's 90% renewables, then that's not a lot of gas that's going to be left over. So how does that make sense? Again, we don't know because they haven't actually told us how much gas they're assuming will be in the system. Same problem with transmission, which they say is going to be $23 per megawatt hour. That's the black and grey bars there. We don't know what projects they've included. We don't know what costs they've assumed. But we do know that most of the transmission projects in the ISP, in the space of 4 years, blew out 100 to 500% in cost. So this is probably a massive underestimate. But again, we can't check it because they don't give us the data. Then we look at spillage, and this is my favorite one because Gen Cost is not even internally consistent in what they say the spillage costs are. So on the graph, that little bar there is $4 per megawatt hour. But in the text of the report, they say that it's $8 per megawatt hour. So which one is it? I don't know. But either way, it should be more than that. When we look at the ISP spillage costs, which is how much waste and energy you have from overbuilding wind and solar, that should be more than double $4 per megawatt hour. Then we have capacity factors. So remember how the CSIRO were incredibly pessimistic about capacity factors for nuclear? Well, for some reason, they are very optimistic about the capacity factors for renewables. So they say that solar would be 19 to 32% and wind 29 to 48%. When we look at the real data from the National Electricity Network and we try to figure out, okay, what are the capacity factors of wind and solar right now? They're actually more like 20% and 29%, and they're only going to get worse because as you build more and more wind and solar, you have to go to further and further places which are less suited, have poorer wind conditions essentially, and so those numbers will only deteriorate with time. And essentially, while the pessimistic capacity factors for nuclear make nuclear look worse, the optimistic capacity factors for renewables make it look better. And they exclude offshore wind. And as we've just heard from Steven, the Victorian government has committed to offshore wind targets. So you can bet that we're going to have to be paying for offshore wind, which Gen Cost says is so expensive that they didn't even bother considering it. So this is going to be an underestimate by any stretch of the imagination. So when we then go in and fix just some of those assumptions, we get something like this. So these on the left are Gen Cost's numbers, and on the right you can see that we've put in the more realistic economic life for nuclear and capacity factors and updated the storage cost. Nuclear is clearly cheaper than renewables. And those point estimates show the most realistic capacity factors in the range. And coal is clearly the cheapest, and if you do a refurbishment, it's cheaper still. There's just really no question there. So then we come to the ISP, because the problem with Gen Cost is it's not a full system analysis. It's not meant to be a substitute. The authors were very clear about that. So the ISP is supposed to be this full system analysis that says, yes, renewables plus transmission, distribution, storage, gas, that is the lowest cost path for energy transition. That is the claim. But it doesn't test renewables against anything else, so they win by default. And this is because the AEMO strictly bind the ISP in every scenario to all government policies, and that includes the 82% renewables by 2030 target, which is the current federal government target, which most energy experts will tell you is not going to happen because the workforce constraints are just unimaginable. It will not happen. And so they don't model nuclear. They don't model new coal. There's just a rule in the model that they are not allowed to do that. And so, of course, renewables are going to look like the cheapest because there's no other contenders. The other problem with the ISP is that they use these uncosted spongy fillers. So they have ultra-flexible hydrogen electrolyzers, which basically ramp up during the day, during daylight hours when solar output is really high, make lots of hydrogen, and then are flexible enough to ramp down in the evening when the peak happens so that the grid doesn't go down. And that boosts renewables capacity factors. It makes solar look a lot more economical than it really is. Then you have consumers being expected to buy lots and lots of home batteries. So AEMO expects a 30-fold increase by 2050, and they also expect you to hand over control of your batteries to a central operator who will have perfect foresight of the weather and charge and discharge your battery so that it can support the grid the best, never mind what you actually want to do with your battery. And also EVs. A third of the time EVs will be charging and discharging as the grid requires. So how many of you drive home from work during peak hour? Yep, got a few up there. So yeah, you can't do that anymore because your EV will need to be plugged into the grid to support the grid when it's peak time. Yeah. So that's what the ISP is assuming. And that's where Frontier comes in, because the ISP didn't test nuclear, but Frontier does. And while the Frontier Economics Report does have all of the flaws that I just mentioned in the ISP, it's trying to mirror the ISP. And so it actually shows that in playing in a modelling world in which those assumptions, those flawed assumptions that are unrealistic, actually help renewables more than they do nuclear, nuclear comes out on top. So it found that including nuclear results in substantial cost savings compared to AEMO's approach. Nuclear saves about $100 billion regardless of which scenario you look at. So essentially in a model that is trying to support renewables as much as possible, nuclear still lowers costs. So you can imagine when you look at the real world how much more nuclear would save on costs compared to a system that is 90% renewables. So now, before I get to rooftop solar, I'll just basically summarize. What we've seen from those three reports is that if we want to go lowest cost, if that's all we care about, low cost reliability, we need to build new coal. If we care about reducing emissions and doing that at lowest cost, we need to build nuclear. Renewables are not going to help us. So what about rooftop solar, people say? Because how many people here have rooftop solar on their roofs? Okay, a few. How many people here have noticed a bill decrease from their rooftop solar? No, not that many. Interesting. So a lot of people do find that their bills do go down after they get rooftop solar. And the tricky thing here is that often that logic is then applied to the rest of the grid, and people say, oh, well, if this lowers my bills, it must lower everyone's bills, but that is not what is happening. Rooftop solar only saves a grid 4 cents per kilowatt hour, and this is in averted coal and gas operating costs and fuel costs. And so you can see that red line there, that's 4 cents per kilowatt hour. But rooftop solar owners are saving on average 8 to 18 cents per kilowatt hour on their bills through exports, which is the feed-in tariffs, and self-consumption, so averting usage charges during the day. So you can see, regardless of state or system size or tariff type, all of those numbers are well above 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So rooftop solar owners, on average, save 2 to 4.5 times more than what they should be saving. So this creates a reverse Robin Hood. And what that means is you've got people who can't afford rooftop solar, or they might be renting or in an apartment, essentially cross-subsidising those who have it. And in the Ausgrid network, which is the network around this area, rooftop solar owners save $700 to $1,200 more than they should every year on average. And that means because Ausgrid, it's not a company that has that can make more profit off of this. It's a regulated monopoly, so it has regulated profits every year. If it can't recoup enough revenue from one customer, it recoups what it has lost from another customer, and that's where the cross-subsidy arises. So basically, those without solar are paying part of the bills of those with solar, and that's part of the reason why their bills are going up so much. So, and this is also to do with the network tariff system, so I won't go into that in too much detail here, but if you'd like to learn more about that, we've written a paper called Rooftop Solar Paradise Lost, just released last week, so come grab one from up the front and ask me any questions later if you have more questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zoe. That was fantastic again. I just want to, I've had someone give me a note just to let everyone know about a court case that's going on tomorrow in the federal court in the city. It's at 9:30 a.m. It's a case between rainforest reserves, which are up in far north Queensland. They've done a lot of great work showing the destruction that's happening up there with wind projects. They've got a court case against Tanya Plebiscite. It's for the Upper Burdekin wind project, so they're looking for support. If anyone can get down there and support that court case, please. They just want people to sit in there and attend that case to show some support. And also I want to just point out we've got a very special VIP guest as well, Rachel Merton down the back there. She's the Upper House member in New South Wales for the Liberal Party. Just a big thank you for Miss Merton for coming along. So thank you very much. Okay, now for the main event. I'm sure you're all excited about this one. He's come a very long way. He was elected to the Senate back in 2013 for the Liberal National Party in Queensland. And since that time, he's proven himself as to be one of the most dynamic and knowledgeable senators in the Australian Parliament. Now, that is a compliment because there's not many knowledgeable ones in there, but he's very knowledgeable. And it would be fitting, I think, if Peter Dutton was able to find a place for Senator Canavan in his upcoming ministry. So we'll see about that. But please welcome Senator Matt Canavan.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming along here tonight. It's fantastic to be down here. Does anyone think the world's gone mad? Are you in that boat? I'm there. Yeah, I'm there. I've been in the Senate now for about 10 years, just over 10 years. And I don't think I've changed that much. I sort of saying the same things I did 10 years ago. I think we need to build a high-efficiency, low-emission coal-fired power station. I think we should need shale gas resources like the US has. I even think we should build some wind and solar, not the crazy amounts we're doing right now, but there's some use for it around the place. Got a bill to remove the ban on nuclear energy, all those things. So I've sort of stayed, here if I'm on the right of this platform from my perspective, I'm here. I used to have a lot of friends around me, including from your part of the world. And then all my colleagues went to sign up net zero and they went over there, over the left. And I feel very lonely now and isolated, and I'm mad and crazy apparently, and I don't know what's going on. What has happened? What's happened to the world? I feel like I've often felt the last few years as this has happened. I felt like I'm like Alice in Wonderland, and just to be clear, I'm very happy with my current pronouns. I'm not seeking to transition, but there's that scene at the tea party where she goes, sits down, and the March Hare says, "Have some wine," and Alice says, "Well," she looks around and says, "I can't see any wine," and the March Hare says to her, "Well, that's because there isn't any." And it feels exactly like Chris Bowen. He's saying, "Have some cheap power. Have some cheap power. You're going to get cheap power." You look around and go, "Well, there isn't any, Chris. Where is it?" He goes, "Oh, no, there's not now. There's not. We learned that this week, right? We learned there's not. Because this week, the Prime Minister, he dumped his energy modelling, right? You remember that? He said he was going to cut your power bills by $275. He said it was the most comprehensive, apparently better than yours, Zoe, better than yours, better than everybody's. It was the most comprehensive modelling ever done in history, ever. The most beautiful, most tremendous modelling ever. And he's dumped it this week. So I know, it was no good. You're not getting the power bill cut. So he's dumped his modelling. Don't you think he should have dumped Chris Bowen instead of the modelling? Shouldn't he have done that? All right? Shouldn't he have got rid of him? He's the one that failed, right? So, I don't know. It's very strange. We're in this middle of this election campaign. We've got 35 days to see what happens. Do you know that in those 35 days, China is going to emit enough carbon emissions to be equivalent to all of Australia's carbon emissions in 1 year, and then again, 2 years. 2 years worth of our carbon emissions during our election campaign. China's got a ship circumnavigating our island once again, mapping out our submarine cables just in case they need to cut them at some point. We've got a US president tomorrow who's going to make some big decisions. The world will be watching, might have a big impact. And little old Australia here, what are we doing in our election campaign? We're focused on What should we do to change the temperature of the globe? That's what we're doing. That's where our politicians' are heads at, even though we've had the biggest drop in standard of living in history, biggest ever. Like, there's never been anything like this outside of the Great Depression for Australians. It's very, very hard, and hardly anyone's focused on that. We're all focused on saving the planet. Now, I don't know if, yep, my slides are up there. So I'm going to go very high level here and just, I'm pulling out like my favourite hits, if you like. I've done a lot of this stuff over the years. And I've got a few sort of stats that I come back to often to try and, after I get back from Canberra to central Queensland, back to coal country, I just try and detox and think, am I mad? Am I crazy? Or is this real? And so I look back at this sort of data. So some of you might have seen something like this before. This is just the use of energy all around the world for all energy types, not just for electricity. Energy since the Industrial Revolution, since 1800. And if you look back at 1800, we relied completely on something called biomass. That's basically wood, straw, sometimes even worse things, but basically just whatever you could burn, people used for their energy needs. Then coal came along, then oil, then gas, and had some big dams. And now in the last few decades, we've had some solar and wind. You see up those small slivers up the top. That's where we stand today. Now, the reason I put this chart up is we're trying to do something at the moment. We're being promised something will happen that has never happened before in history. The idea is you probably hear this word transition. We hear it a lot in coal country. We've all got to transition. Apparently we've got to transition our jobs. We're pretty hopeful it doesn't mean transition our genders, but we never know. Who knows? That might become mandatory in the future. But we've got to transition. There has never been an energy transition before. Never. So that little biomass, can I go back? Yeah, so this little biomass, I want you to concentrate on this here. It sort of fades into insignificance down the end of the chart as we get to modern times. But when you actually isolate it and look at it, we are actually using double the amount of biomass today than we did at the start of the Industrial Revolution as a world, right? It's not a lot, it's a very small share of our total energy needs now, which have grown immeasurably since the Industrial Revolution. But the world as a whole is actually using double the amount of effectively wood and other combustible material than we did 200 odd years ago. So we haven't transitioned away from it. We're actually using double of it. Right? There's no energy transition. There's just more and more energy demands on the world. Now, it would be good to transition. It would be good to get this down to nothing, because this is the real environmental problem in the world, not climate change here. That's an issue, something that needs to be managed. But this is the primary cause and reason why around 4 million people die from indoor pollution a year and another 3 million from outdoor pollution. Most of that's because of this, because they're using and burning woods and poorer quality fuels indoors, because they don't have electricity. Poor people who don't have electricity. It's terrible. You go to India, you go to Southeast Asia, you go to China, you can't see the sky. It's this. Not coal, not modern coal-fired power stations. It's mainly this. Now, then isolate the coal section. So just pull out the coal section. It says there's never been an energy transition. Never. But if we assume some projections think that coal demand in the next few decades will stagnate, some think it'll go to zero. That's another chart I like, just crazy. But anyway, it's still growing. We've just hit a new record of coal use in the last year. But even if you assume that it just stays stagnant for the next 40 years, we're going to have to actually use more coal in the next 40 years than we ever have since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Right? So for all the 200 years before, more than 200 years before, we'll have to use more in the next 40 years, because it's that we're using that much, and Asia, particularly Asia, needs so much energy. Remember that Glasgow conference, Net Zero? Remember that? Right? It was apparently a big success. We all signed up to Net Zero. The whole world did, apparently, except for a couple of holdouts. There's more now. There's more that are pulling out. But everyone signed it. And then what do they do after that? Well, Australia hasn't grown its coal industry. This is coal mining. This is the change in coal mining since the Glasgow conference, since the world signed up to Net Zero. We've slightly reduced our coal mining. And I want to put this table in context, because what does 51 million tonnes mean? It's a bit hard to describe. Do you remember that Adani coal mine? Do you remember that? They don't talk about that much anymore. We're happy with that, but it's going, actually, by the way. You don't hear about it, but it's producing. It's created 2,000 jobs, paying lots of royalties. Fantastic. Thank you, Bob Brown, for coming up to Queensland. I'll always be grateful to Bob Brown. He helped get that coal mine going. He's a lot more successful than me. So that mine produces about 10 million tonnes a year. right? And remember the big palaver about it? It was a massive issue. Everybody apparently had an opinion on it. Well, in the last 2 years we've got 2 years of data since Glasgow. In the 2 years after Glasgow, Mongolia has opened the equivalent of 5 Adani coal mines, right? Just Mongolia. Indonesia has opened the equivalent of 16. 160 divided by 10, 16 Adani coal mines. India has gone for 20. And of course, our friends over there in China have opened up an amazing equivalent of 58 Adani coal mines in just 2 years. And doesn't that put into perspective the ludicrousness of our politics? That we would waste so much time, so much focus, arguing about a 10 million tonne a year coal mine, and China goes and opens almost 60 of them in just 2 years. What are we doing? Like, what? As I say, you're through the looking glass, aren't you? Like, what is going on in this world? And I'll just break it down quickly, that India, we're often here, India's massively increasing solar, and they are off a low base. This is in terawatt hours. But in the last 10 years, that dot is 10 years ago, in the last 10 years, India's increased its use of coal by 600 terawatt hours. You don't need to know what that is, just a unit. And in terms of solar, it's just 110. So coal growth is outpacing solar in India at the moment by 6 times, and that gap is not slowing down. And then finally, and I'll leave the charts here, goes back to my indoor pollution story. I mean, we should be. I take a lot of pride. I'm very proud of what our mining industry achieves in this country, what we do for our own nation and wealth we produce, the jobs we produce, and of course what we do for the rest of the world. That the hard work that the men and women in those industries do, they spend a lot of time away from their families. It's a very tough existence. They get paid well, but it's not an easy life. The hard work they do, yes, it creates money and wealth, but there's a reason people pay good money for it. They pay good money for it because it really does change people's lives. And if you look back in our generation, our lifetimes, my generation, I was born in 1980, so this chart roughly starts about then. The number of people, the percentage of people, this chart is, now it's a long time since, I think it's $2.40 US a day or something, so the share of people living on roughly that, something like that per day, a definition of absolute poverty. The share of people in the Asia-Pacific region living in poverty in our lifetimes has fallen from over 80%. 8 in 10 people were living on a few dollars a day, down to almost nothing. It's about 2 to 3% today in that region are living under the poverty line. And that's in real dollars. That's an amazing achievement that the world's made. And yes, there's this smog and that because of that development, but that will get cleaned up as they get wealthier. And it has coincided with a massive increase in the use of energy. They would not have achieved those results without a huge increase in the use of energy. And so Peter Dutton is right the other day that energy is the economy. If we don't have access to affordable, reliable energy supplies, our economy will die. And I'm using that word energy in particular. Most of the previous speakers have spoken about electricity. Very, very important. Very important. And it's the thing that I suppose impacts most people directly because you pay an electricity bill. You see it every quarter and you see it going up. But electricity is only 30% of our carbon emissions. And so I do take a little bit of issue with Paul's made this statement and also sometimes my colleagues who seem to think that if we just switch on nuclear power plants, everything will be solved and net zero will be just around the corner. That's not true, because what do we do with the other 2/3? Nuclear, as everything I've seen in the modelling, nuclear is only going to provide electricity. It's not going to provide industrial heat. I don't think we're going to make nuclear-powered cars anytime soon. We just take baby steps here. We should probably. There's a massive emissions on farms, apparently. I dispute some of that, but that's in the measured statistics. Nuclear energy doesn't help with that. So what do we do there? What do we do there with all of those other 2/3 of activities that get captured by this net zero idea? And what's happening there is perhaps even more dramatic for our country than the electricity situation. As I say, people see their high power bills. But are we getting food here tonight, Stephen? Are we getting fed? I've got to fast. It's Lent, so I should be fasting, so that's okay. So I'm probably not going to eat here tonight, but some of you will go home and have dinner, or maybe you've already had dinner, you have a late night by the look of it. And when you had that food, around half of the food you eat, maybe not tonight, maybe more than half, maybe less than half, about half of that would have been grown with something called urea. Does anyone know what urea is? How many people know what urea is? This is a very knowledgeable audience. Probably not the average voting collective here, but yeah, why would you know about urea? Why would people don't have the time to understand these things? But people here know urea, and if you know about it, you know it's the most commonly used fertiliser. It is made from natural gas. There's no possible way of making urea except and but for the use of natural gas. So when all of those Greta Thunberg wannabes run around with their signs saying you can't eat fossil fuels, they're absolutely wrong. We do eat fossil fuels, and in fact, half the world's food production relies on it. Now, the scary thing is, Australia, in the last 2 years now, just in the last 2 years, we no longer produce urea in Australia. So energy is not just about the economy. In my view, energy is about our security as well. We no longer have the type of food security we should have and did have because we no longer produce the most important fertiliser that our farmers use in this country. We rely on importing that from China, from the Middle East, and if we lose access to those imports, we will not be able to grow enough food for Australians. It's disgraceful, right? In a land of this number of resources, this amount of gas, this amount of land, surely we should be able to feed our own country. We're on the cusp of not doing that because of our mad energy policies. We've also lost our last plastics manufacturers as well. We used to have one here in Sydney at Qenos. There's one in Melbourne as well, same company. They're gone. They produce polypipe and water tanks. They're all gone. That's really important for our farm sector too. So we're doing enormous damage to people's household bills, to our economy, and to our security as Australians. And I just hope that very, very soon, whether it's not in this election campaign or not long after, we do wake up, we dump net zero, and we start focusing on our country and Australians again. Thank you very much for coming along here tonight. Great to be with you, and God bless.
Please, everyone, another round of applause for Matt Canavan and all our speakers tonight. So you know how you go to these events and they always run over time? Well, we're actually ahead of time, which is really good because I wanted this to happen. We're going to take a little break, and we'll maybe about 10 minutes or so. So feel free to do a little bit of mingling. Most importantly, head down to the back table where Noreen is. The notepad's there if you want to write down your questions for the Q&A, and we'll kick off again soon. So enjoy your time mingling and having a bit of a yarn to everyone. Thank you. All right, we're all set. Here's your microphone. You'll have to share this around, everyone. So this question is to anyone on the panel, anyone that wants to answer it. Please explain what happens to crops that grow under solar panels.
Crops that grow under solar panels. You want to go for that?
I'll give it to Matt because I can see he's fired up, but just there's this fiction that you can use these as dual-use spaces, but I have never seen a combine harvester, a sower, anything plough through a couple of kilometres of concrete and steel. You can potentially graze livestock under them for a couple of years, depending on how long it takes to grow, but then how are you re-sowing that crop? How are you growing clover? How are you growing lucerne? How are you growing your grasses? And then what happens when it gets rife through or weeds? How are you spraying them? It's a fiction and it's a marketing spin that no farmer would ever concede, but I'll hand over to Matt.
All right, next question. This one's about wind droughts. So what happens when we have a wind drought with these wind turbines? Where do we get our power from?
Well, presumably we're supposed to get it from storage and potentially gas, but as we've seen, storage is incredibly expensive, and usually the people who were saying, oh, we can rely on wind and solar with batteries and a bit of gas and it'll be fine, they assume the batteries will become really, really, really cheap. But that hasn't happened. The home battery prices, for example, have stayed flat for the last 6 years. So when you don't have wind blowing, you don't have wind power, and if you don't have a reliable baseload backing up the system, you get blackouts, essentially.
Look, we had a wind drought last year, quite a significant one, and you might have seen that just in the last few weeks, your power bill's going to go up again, another 9%. It's predicted for the default market offer, at least. And a big part of that is because we had that wind drought and wholesale power prices went through the roof. You might have seen the government, Chris Bowen, they blame coal-fired power stations for breaking down. They reckon they're unreliable. But news to these people, it's not coal-fired power stations that break down per se, it's old machines that break down. Now, when you're running a machine that's in its 50th, 60th year of life, they break down, old cars break down. And that's what's happening when we get these wind droughts. They have to fire up these old coal-fired power stations. They run them in ways that they weren't designed to do, past their design life. And of course, you have then sometimes breakages. What we should be doing is building new machines to replace the old machines so we can keep the lights on. And there is some modelling, and Zoe will correct me if I'm wrong, I think it is in the old Energy Security Board modelling back in the day. We've had more bodies in a graveyard in the energy space in the last few years, but we had this body called the Energy Security Board. Malcolm set it up. It's gone now, as is Malcolm. Sort of. Sort of. In a way, in a sense. Anyway, they did some really interesting modelling. They looked at Victoria's weather patterns, and they could calculate how much storage you'd need to get through a wind drought based on historical data. And it came out that you'd need to install $700 billion worth of batteries to get through them. Now, that is more than Victoria's total annual economic output. And Dan Andrews is doing a really good job to make that even much lower than that amount. So it is absolutely ludicrous and ridiculous, but still we keep this stupid plan, which anybody that looks at the detail knows will not happen.
Okay, This next question is for Paul, and it's regarding small modular nuclear reactors. It's a three-part question. I don't know if you'll get all of this, but where are they going to be built? Are they going to be the future? And what's the cost and the megawatt outage compared to large reactors?
The small modular reactors, there's a couple of things. Basically, if you have a large-scale power plant, it's going to be more efficient. But the small ones are more efficient for rural areas, nuclear, marine, like Navy, aircraft carrier, submarines. They'll also be good for data centers. Google is building their own nuclear power plants for the data centers so they can power AI or mine crypto. China, for what I understand, Asia pays about 9 cents a kilowatt hour for their nuclear power. These can be built in 5 years. The only reason we don't do that is because we hamstring ourselves. Which question didn't I answer?
I think that's... What was that? How they compare to large reactors?
You want to use those for regions that are either remote, mobile, or because otherwise, the large reactors are more efficient.
Okay, this question's for Gerard. What type of land are renewables being rolled out on in rural communities? Is it mainly desert?
No, it's not the desert, because the problem is desert seems like it would be a good idea. Put it out in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't bother anyone. But then how do you get the electricity into Sydney? How do you get the electricity into Melbourne? How do you get it up to Brisbane? So we do build them inland because we don't want to put them through the Blue Mountains, but we'll put it just a little bit further out, and then we'll build transmission lines into Sydney, and then we'll also build transmission lines into our pumped hydro storage down at Snowy Hydro. So think about how many kilometres you got from the Arana out in Dubbo. Well, so you have 400 kilometres away. So you've got 400 kilometres of transmission lines coming into Sydney. You've got 400 kilometres of transmission lines heading down to Snowy Hydro. Then you've got another couple of hundred kilometres transmission lines coming from Snowy Hydro back into Sydney again. So it's not just the industrial solar plants, it's also all the transmission lines that transport all of that electricity. And this is actually, I put up the Net Zero Steering Group before. They had two different models. And the reason that you got all the solar Tasmanias all down the east coast was because they did a model where they put it out in the desert and it was so astronomically expensive. Except the problem is, how do you build it? Right? You've got to get all of your trucks out there, all of your cement pours, all of your workers. It's this idea we can put, the reason there's nothing in the desert is because it's really bloody expensive to put stuff in the desert. We're putting them places as close as we're willing to where people live. And guess what? That's where all our prime agricultural land is. That's where all our national parks are.
And even then, it's tens of thousands of kilometres of power lines because you've got to connect this to Snowy Hydro and the rural areas. And all of that, those power lines, they have to be maintained. If the forest kind of grows into those power lines and there's a big windstorm and there's a fire, you know what that's going to be because of? Climate change.
Yeah, and just to give you a real-world example of the environmental destruction, the tragic environmental destruction that's occurring. There's a number of wind projects just west of where I live in Rockhampton. It's not a particularly windy area, but they do want to hug the existing transmission line network, as Gerard said, to save costs. And so they're going as high as they can. They're going up on mountain ridge lines to get as much wind as they can. And to do that, these modern wind turbines are 280 metres tall to the tip of the blade. So put that in context, if you've ever been to Canberra, the flag in Parliament House 180 odd metres tall. So you add 100 metres on top of that, and that's the size of them. It's because they're so big, they need a really big flat pad for the foundation. So they need about 100 by 100 metres. And so you can imagine if you're trying to build these on top of a mountaintop, but you need a 100 by 100 metre pad, you've got to take off a lot of the mountaintop to get to that. So in some places, they are blowing up. They use explosives and blow it up. They're blowing up 20 metres off the top of mountains to create that. That sediment that is created gets pushed off the side of the mountain. These areas are about 60 kilometres from the Great Barrier Reef. And, I've been screamed at for decades now that if farmers pull down some trees and more sediment ends up in the river and goes to the reef, you kill the coral. But apparently if the sediment is from a wind turbine production, no, it's fine, it's all good. If a farmer did this down the valley, they'd go to jail. They'd go to jail. But these foreign, well-funded, rapacious companies just get a blank cheque to destroy our beautiful, pristine rainforest environment in Queensland. It is unbelievable. I never thought I'd have to don a koala suit, but I'm this far away from having to do it.
Okay, this question's for Senator Canavan again. We hear about the coal lobby and how powerful they are. If that were true, why are we not building new coal plants and why are we blowing up the old ones?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, I mean, I think the truth is that the so-called coal lobby, or let's call them the second biggest export industry in our country lobby, they don't need coal-fired power plants built here. We export about 95% of our coal. So that's not their core business. They're not focused on that. They're a business, so yeah, they look at they should look to maximise the value of it for their shareholders, and some of them are on woke agendas that sort of defy belief, but that's just not their core business anymore. So they're not the ones pushing for that. The problem is we're fast losing our manufacturing sector. It is weak. It's the manufacturing sector that needs those power stations. The aluminium smelter up at Tomago, the steel plant down at Port Kembla, they're the ones that require the really cheap energy. And I'd suggest that particular lobby group is not as powerful as it used to be because it doesn't employ as many people. It's sort of been pushed to the margins. But, I think we should have learnt during COVID how important supply chains are We should certainly know right now, given the actions of China and what's happening around the world, that we should be reinvesting in our manufacturing capability. And that should mean we should be desperately seeking to get whatever the cheapest, most reliable energy is possible to save what we've got left. That should be our first goal, save what we've got left. And so we certainly shouldn't be wantonly shutting down the coal-fired power stations that underpin that production. The coal industry won't miss a heartbeat if the coal-fired power stations go. There's plenty of demand, as I showed, in Japan and Korea and China and India, but poor old Australia will be left behind if we let that happen.
Okay, this question's for Zoe. What is the consequence of excess energy produced by rooftop solar during the middle of the day?
So this is something that distribution networks have had to be dealing with in many states recently, where we suddenly have this huge influx of rooftop solar during the day. It stresses the grid, and what that means is it can actually shorten the life of your appliances. If the voltage goes too high, it can cause reverse power flow. There's just all of this wear and tear that happens when voltage goes crazy. And so distributors have to deal with that. And what's happening in New South Wales is they're actually introducing two-way export tariffs. So Ausgrid has introduced a charge for rooftop solar exports that are sent out above a certain threshold during sort of peak daylight hours when there's most of the rooftop solar output going into the system. And this faced a lot of backlash. It was labelled a sun tax and everything. There were lots of rooftop solar owners who were very mad about this. But our research actually shows, and you can read the paper that I brought along if you would like to learn more about this. We did an analysis of what would happen if you do have the retailers pass through this export tariff, because the networks, they set the prices, but the retailers can repackage it if they want to. But if the retailers do pass that price signal through, that charge to the customer, does that mean that rooftop solar customers are actually paying their fair share of network costs? And the answer was no. So it reduces those outsized benefits that rooftop solar owners are enjoying, but it doesn't actually eliminate it. So the cross subsidies from those without solar to those with solar will continue even under the proposed export charges that are going to be introduced. So while it might help with grid stability, it's not going to help completely eliminate cross subsidies that are driving up everyone's bills.
Can I ask Dale a question on this? Does the large foreign-owned solar farms out at where was that one you had in New South Wales? Was it what's it called? Arana, that one. Do they have to pay a sun tax? It was just an household.
No, because they're not on the distribution network, they're on the transmission network. And yeah, my position is extra solar in our grid is bad, whether it's rooftop solar or whether it's utility scale solar, because we just don't need any more of it. And the thing is, that price signal is, the market is trying to tell us we don't need more solar, because if you look at the capture prices for wind and solar versus the volume weighted spot price in the market, wind and solar prices have been going down and down and down. And what that means is the market is saying, this doesn't have that much value, we don't need more wind and solar. But then you have governments coming in with the capacity investment scheme, which is just taxpayers underwriting renewables projects. So guaranteed profits for renewables investors, essentially. And so that government intervention has destroyed that market signal completely.
Okay, next one's for Paul. If we introduce nuclear, will we need wind and solar and net zero policies?
I don't think there's anything good about wind and solar compared to stable and cheap energy sources that we have currently. Rooftop solar, for some degree, I can see how it would make sense. Well, maybe not, but I mean, certainly from a national policy point of view, not on cost, not on reliability, not on national security. It's just three ways to shoot yourself in the foot, assuming you had 3 feet.
But the question was, if we have nuclear power here, will we need wind and solar?
No. No.
So we get net zero by default.
Well, you don't. First, net zero shouldn't be a goal. We're shipping off our cheap coal to Asia to be burnt there. So there's what we're doing is utterly pointless. Even if we did want, as was pointed out before, the power plants are going up like mad in Asia anyway. The whole net zero thing is a grift in order to get us to subsidize our own demise and export cheap coal to Asia while we virtue signal with our teal t-shirts.
This one's for Gerard. The economic life of wind and solar projects is 20 years. Agricultural grazing land are productive for thousands of years. Has anyone produced a cost-benefit analysis for this?
Maybe this is something I should get onto. The lifespan is actually a really important point, right? Because it's one thing for a farmer to say, you know what, I will take that subsidy, please, and I will put the solar farm on my land and my property, and I'll get that nice little payout, and it drought-proofs me. It means that it doesn't really matter what my productive output is. It means that I keep my head above water. But I'm getting a little bit older, and Warringah looks quite nice. I've been promised that there'll be no wind turbines on this coast, so I might sell up. So then, what happens about the next bloke that comes in? What happens to that productive land from generation to generation to generation? It is scarring the landscape in a way that is taken out of productive output for everyone. And then the next bloke who comes in, he goes, I might buy this, and hang on, you're telling me that it's about to, the subsidies are going to run out, it's got a shelf life of 20, 25 years. We've just had a hailstorm, and so none of the panels work anymore. Who's responsible for getting rid of that? Oh, the company that set that up, they're long bank, that have long gone bust, they're overseas. So I've just got all of this machinery and industrial plant on my farm that now I've got to deal with. Well, who's going to take it? Who's going to get rid of it? How do I regenerate my soil? It's completely destroying our agricultural production and will be with us for generations and generations and generations.
How stupid are we? Honestly, are we serious in this country? Something criminal about that. It's not right.
Well,
take the question from the floor. Look, I don't think people are stupid, but we have gotten complacent, right? My generation have been very, very lucky, been blessed. We're a very, very lucky country. We really haven't experienced a recession. Well, I haven't experienced a recession while I've been in the workplace. COVID doesn't really count because while it went backwards for a bit, the government gave so much money out, took on so much debt that average family incomes actually went up, even though we had a recession. Amazing. We're just left with $1 trillion of debt now. So I think that's the problem, that there hasn't been a wake-up call. I worry why I keep doing what I'm doing, despite being isolated, despite making my colleagues pretty frustrated or pretty angry with me sometimes. I would prefer if we didn't have to go through so many lessons in the school of hard knocks before we wake up. Right, I'm trying. I think all of us, there's a very large degree of knowledge in this room. I think it's incumbent on those of us that do see the warning signs, the gathering storm, that we try and warn people about that before it happens. Because I'm confident we'll eventually wake up. I'm an optimist like Gerard. We will wake up. It's just a matter of how much pain Australians have to go through before they do. And I prefer that to be a lot less than it has to be.
We'll only wake up when there's no electricity. That's the time we'll wake up. It's too late.
Just on your point there, right? Matt and I, we spend a fair bit of time in Canberra, Matt more than me, but I do make my way down there sometimes. You would be surprised at how disconnected your federal MPs are. And no, well. So someone made the comment, right? So maybe not surprised. Someone made the comment, right, that it was malicious or evil. I've sat in office after office after office. They either A, have absolutely no idea, or B, they say, well, we looked at the polls, this is what the electorate wants. Yeah. If the electorate doesn't want this, you have to tell them. Because there is a consensus in Canberra that Australia wants net zero, that this is the path that Australia wants to go down. That is why Albanese is proudly saying 82%, because he thinks it's an election winner. If you don't want it, get your voice heard. Get angry, get organised, get involved in groups like what Steve's doing. Host more events like this. Share things on social media. When you're at barbecues, talk to your friends about it. This is a fundamentally important issue. If we don't want to go through the pain, we can't go quietly.
Do I get it? We're getting towards the end now. We'll have to squeeze in a couple more questions. This one's for Zoe. How does the modelling that Albanese walked away from yesterday tie in with the ISP, AEMO and CSIRO modelling?
Yes. So the Reputex modelling, which the Prime Minister has walked away from, is where that 82% renewables target by 2030 comes from, which I mentioned before. So that 82% renewables target wasn't actually a target to start with. It was an outcome of this policy that the Reputex modelling was trying to show. And that's also where the $275 off your power bills come from. So both of those come from the same modelling. And so now that they've walked away from that modelling, the question is, why do they still have the 82% renewables by 2030 target, especially considering even energy experts who love renewables and think we should be doing renewables don't think it's going to happen. AEMO's own workforce report showed that in order to get to that 82% renewables by 2030 target, you would have to triple the number of engineers, electrical engineers in the workforce in 5 years, and then the number of electrical engineers would drop below current levels after 2030. Those kinds of massive increases and decreases and variations in workforce don't really happen outside of wartime. So are you going to conscript engineers? Like, how are you going to have a workforce that can build all of these transmission lines and wind and solar farms to meet that target? It's completely impossible. And so, yeah, it's surprising that he hasn't walked away from that target, given that they've walked away from the $275 promise.
Okay, we'll have to squeeze in two more questions. This one's for Senator Canavan. Donald Trump has abandoned the Paris Agreement. Why hasn't the coalition, when Australia is only 1% of the world's emissions and the biggest emitters are not compliant?
Yeah, look, it's hard for me to answer why. Obviously, I've taken a position against net zero, and I did that long before Donald Trump was re-elected. I mean, what I can say is that when we did sign up to net zero, the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison told us that we had to do that because Joe Biden was elected and he wanted to do it, which was strange to me because there were a lot of allegations of voting irregularities at that election. Out-of-state voters, dead voters, etc. were claimed. I can't remember anyone saying that Australians voted in that election. I don't know. Did anyone vote in the 2020 US election? You did. Did you vote? It's your fault. Zoe's fault. But you, Paul, did you vote? Yeah, Paul voted. He voted for Biden. Your president. So it really perplexes me that, hang on, shouldn't we get to decide on that? We haven't actually had an election to decide on whether we should support net zero. There hasn't been a battle. We've never asked. Both sides of politics signed up to it. Some people want a referendum. I mean, I don't know, we haven't had enough referendums, but yeah, it would be nice to have that political battle. So I keep pushing for that. I do think a lot of it comes back to what Gerard just said, and this is speculation on my behalf. I'm not trying to say why other people do things. You're asking me to put myself in their mind, but I do hear the same refrain in Canberra that, look, Matt, I know what you're saying about net zero or coal makes some sense, but hey, the polling says this or says that. And it really deflates me to think that our political system now is basically just one big machine where some pollsters put some inputs in and then we're like monkeys just taking the instruction from it. And I'm not naive. You need to do polling to work out what people think and how to argue for things. But I'm very much so trying to approach it that I should be trying to pursue objectives that are consistent with my political party's values, what we think is best for the country, and polling should be a tool with which how do we argue for those things and convince people about why our way is the best. Instead, I think we've got an arse about, and we're using the polling to decide what our principles and values are. We're like the character in the Marx movie saying, hey, you don't like these principles? I've got lots of others that you might be attracted to. And I think that's at the heart of why a lot of Australians have lost trust in the political process because they don't see people being authentic. They don't see people arguing for what they believe and being passionate. It's just a regurgitation of very tired, bland talking points that people see through.
Can I just add one thing? Just one quick thing about the circularity of that. So the politicians pay for propaganda to go to the people through the ABC and also the push polling. And then when the people are propagandized, then the polling reflects the propaganda that the politicians just paid for, thereby validating what they just said. Did I have that right?
I should have said one more thing. We had a real-world experience of this just in the last few years. If we had let polling dictate our position on The Voice, we would have been a yes. It's hard to remember and fathom right now, but 6 months out from the Voice referendum, the polling was pretty clear that 60% of Australians intended to vote yes. Now, Peter Dutton took the brave decision to say, no, we're going to vote no, we're going to push a no vote because that's what we believe. We don't believe dividing our country by race. That was consistent with Liberal and National Party values. We thought, even if we lose this, we're going to fight for what we believe in. And guess what? Within 6 months, people voted 60-40 against. So that, to me, shows how fickle that polling always is, and political leadership can trump and can still win in this country. We should just show the same on these energy issues as well.
One quick thing, the term push polling. Polling is manipulated in order to create the illusion of consensus. Just like, Donald Trump was supposed to lose Iowa by 12 points. Instead, he won it. This is a game that is played, and like a lot of things, it has to be shown for what it is.
Okay, final question. I think this is the most important question of the night. And probably the most important issue. So I'm going to get a comment from each one of you on this one. How can we combat the story or the lie that is being told to our younger generation that the world is coming to an end due to climate change?
Well, I would say three things. I mean, that's a very big question, but top of the head, three things. We need to tell the truth. We need to tell the truth. We don't think the world is going to end. We need to be courageous and fearless in saying that truth, because it's not fashionable and it means that you won't be popular in the office or you won't be popular at parties. And you need to get vocal and you need to get organised in telling that truth. They have been sold a story, and in that story they get to be the hero because they get to be the person who lives nobly, that does the actions, which means that they can save the planet. And so we need to tell them the truth about that. And I'll probably add, we need to tell a better story as well, and a more compelling vision of what their lives could be. And actually, there is more for you out there than self-flagellating to try and change the weather. You can start a family. You can have kids. You can start a business. You can commit to your community. Whatever that story is, give people a compelling vision of what life would be. Because at the moment, I think young people, they feel they're locked out of the housing market, they feel like they haven't got job prospects, they feel like they're stuck in a renting circle, they feel like they can't get married, they feel like they can't have kids. Well, at least I can be virtuous and recycle, and I can have a Just Stop Oil t-shirt, and I can feel like my life meant something. And I think we just need to give people a more compelling vision, but we also have to tell the truth and not go along with the lies.
The lies really are so transparent if you look at them. I've really wondered about this quite a bit, how such an obvious hypocrisy, such obvious falsehoods still manage to maintain themselves. A corrupt media is definitely part of it, but how do you actually change things? I think maybe asking good questions. Are there times in history where public policy has lied to you? The food pyramid. The only thing that was true about the food pyramid is that it makes you the shape of what it actually is. So getting people to question and not accept by asking sort of tangential questions that then. So that, because the propaganda machine is very effective. It is quite a sight to behold. But I think we are in an age of transparency, increasing transparency, and it can't come soon enough.
I think it comes down to a question of what should you do and what can you do? Because if you decide on what you should do before you figured out what your actual options are, you're going to end up in a very strange place. And that's sort of what we've done is we've gone, oh, we should go down this renewables path to reduce emissions without actually considering, can we actually do that? Is that actually a real option? And I think the problem is in a lot of young people's minds is that they see the current renewables trajectory that we are on as a real option of, oh yes, we can get to 90% renewables, and all of this stuff about coal and nuclear and whatever is just distractions and it's just vested interests, and where the trajectory is getting there, this momentum is where everything is going, and we just need to let that happen. And so I think we need to destroy that narrative that it's going to happen. Like, we need to destroy the idea that that is possible, because it's not, as we've seen from all the costs. We have to bring it back to how much is this going to cost? Is this feasible from an engineering point of view, from a land use point of view? And so I think when people realize the reality that that is not actually an option we can choose, it won't work. You won't have a functional society from that. Then it comes back to the question of really coal and nuclear. If it's someone who really, really cares about emissions reduction and you're not going to be able to change their mind, then just basically make the case for baseload, because that's the only way you can run a society. So and so nuclear, we can do that. Like, there's no engineering reason why we can't. It will cost more than coal. If we're willing to pay that cost, then that's something for the voters to decide. But if you don't want to pay that cost, if you'd like to have cheaper bills, then we've seen from the historical evidence of our power bills that coal has given us, the amazing society that we have, and it's given us cheap power bills in the past.
Thanks, Stephen. It is a very important question. I've got 5 kids that go to school or have gone to school in Rockhampton, and pretty much every parent-teacher night I go to, one of the teachers will sort of lean over the table and whisper to me, "Matt, I love what you're doing on coal. Keep it up." So my answer is, all move to Rockhampton. Come up to where we are, and your kids will get a great education. Because I see some of my mates who live down here, it's a bit worrying, isn't it? Look, I'm not as concerned about that. Maybe it's partly I am coloured from where my kids go to school and I'm a bit remote. But I don't know, a lot of this stuff seems a bit faddish. And kids are susceptible to fads, young people are susceptible to it. I think the wheel's turning, because the biggest issue in my children's lives and their friends' lives, when I talk to them, and some of them now at university, is housing. It's the biggest issue. I just had to try and get my son into a new rental in Brisbane. I'm sure it's even harder here, but it's very brutal. And that lived reality for people is putting any ideas about 2050 and the temperature. It just pales into insignificance with having to have a roof over your head and worrying about that. So my solution is, look, we could all have these programs to try and change the curricula or convince teachers to do different things. Look, the teachers are going to teach what they teach. I think it's very hard for us to control it. But if we have real solutions for young people on the housing issue, well, as I say, they will come and vote for us, because that's what they need. So let's try and, rather than focus too much on changing the propaganda, for people like me in a position of power, let's try and deliver better outcomes for people here and now. We can do that by building more houses, by I want to build new cities, encouraging people to move. We can't all stack ourselves up in Sydney. It's a wonderful place, but we're a big country. Why can't we build new areas, new Sydneys? Let's do that. Let's focus on those solutions, and that will attract people. The practical, real-world issues will attract people more than these utopian fantasies about what might happen generations away from us now.
Okay, everyone, that concludes our Q&A and our event for tonight. I think you'll all agree with me that all 4 speakers deserve a standing ovation. So. And while our speakers filter off stage, I'm going to welcome back Walter Villatora to just give us a final address.
Destroying the environment to save the environment. An economic suicide note, unless we change its trajectory. And I think changing its trajectory is something that starts here tonight. We all have a responsibility to take the next step, particularly for our younger generation. I've seen Steve Tripp achieve extraordinary things. I think his next challenge is to get our speakers to become panellists on the ABC's Q&A. It'll be a ratings winner, there's no doubt. But I dream of a world where the federal cabinet includes Gerard Holland, Zoe Hilton, Paul Vallejo and Matt Canavan. Yes. Can you imagine what a different world it would be if we had true leadership? I'm not a technical person and I haven't worked at NASA. But what I took out of tonight was actually the courageous leadership of our speakers. That to me is the most important thing. And I found it incredibly inspirational. Sometimes I have become very despondent of what I see out there in our political leadership, our leadership in society. But occasionally I'll come across people like our speakers tonight that is such a shot in the arm, that's what keeps me going. And just keep an eye on the candidate in Whitlam, Ben Britton, that would have fitted right in here tonight, who's well known to a lot of other people. And this is the next generation coming through that hasn't given up, that's very much a part of this mindset of leadership and their response. So he's a veteran, a young veteran, and he's continuing to serve his country through the political side of things. So if you'd like to engage more, and if you're a member of the party, please see John at the front to become involved as a volunteer in the Warringah campaign. Alternatively, if you're not a member of the Liberal Party, you'd be most welcome to join our branch, the Condamine branch, and John can help you with that as well. So please stay with us tonight a little bit longer if you'd like to have a drink and network. And you are the most important. The volunteers, members of the party and the members of the community is really what's going to make all the difference. So thank you for joining us this evening and enjoy the rest of the night. Thank you.